what's better than a movie giving late 90s nostalgia, major government conspiracies and cover-ups, sci-fi like clones, and hard drugs? Absolutely nothing! And They Cloned Tyrone has all of that. The film was directed by Joel Taylor and premiered at the American Black Film Festival on June 14th and began streaming on Netflix on July 21st. It stars John Boyega as local drug dealer Fontaine, Jamie Foxx as Slick Charles the Pimp, and Teyonah Parris as the kick-ass Nancy Drew-loving Yo-Yo. The three lead actors have hysterical and amazing chemistry, which makes it an absolute joy to watch them unravel the mystery that they're living in. Speaking of which, let's take a closer look at what was really going on in They Cloned Tyrone. Starting off, the film takes place in a neighborhood called the Glen, but the city or state that the Glen is in is never made clear, and at one point even, a reporter was about to mention the city, but a cough prevents us from hearing it. The Glen could be described as retrofuturistic, as it takes place in a modern or even future time, evident by a reference to Obama as a previous president, but the world still has the technology and style of the late 90s or early 2000s. An explanation for this could be that the cloning of people in the film first started in the late 90s, so the memories of the original people that were cloned would be from that time period. And living in a world with new cars or technology might interfere with their memories that had outdated tech. Continuing on, the film follows drug dealer Fontaine as he goes about his daily corner store routine, buying booze and scratch cards, and exchanging a few words with Frog, the old homeless guy out front. That night, he visits his pimp Slick Charles to collect money that is owed to him, and a rival dealer named Isaac kills him outside of Slick's motel room, leaving Slick and a girl named Yo-Yo as partial witnesses to the murder. The next morning, Fontaine wakes up in his bed, good as new, and continues on with his daily routine, though today he notices a man covered in blood getting abducted by a black SUV outside of the corner store. He then proceeds to visit Slick for his money, and Fontaine's perfectly unharmed body is alarming to Slick, who proceeds to tell Fontaine that he should be dead as hell. Of course, Fontaine doesn't believe Slick when he's told he died the previous night, so Slick brings him to Yo-Yo, who claims she also heard the gunshots and even saw the perpetrator's car. The three drive around until Yo-Yo points at the car from the previous night, and Slick argues that it's not the same car that he saw, but when Fontaine recognizes it as the SUV that picked up the bloody man on the street earlier that day, he knows something is wrong. Fontaine does what any rational person would do and breaks it to the house next to the car. The three eventually stumble across an elevator and run into a conspiracy that runs deep, literally and figuratively. The elevator brings the three to an underground lab where they find a powdery substance that Slick thinks is cocaine, but ends up making him uncontrollably giggly and happy. In his altered state, Slick accidentally kills a lab tech, who is a white man with afro hair, and the three run out of the building, but not before finding a corpse that looks exactly like Fontaine. The next morning, Fontaine returns to the house, but the elevator is gone, so he, Slick, and Yo-Yo meet at a fried chicken restaurant where they begin to feel uncontrollably happy and giggly as they eat the new chicken. This causes Slick to realize that the powdery substance from the previous night is in the chicken. Yo-Yo goes to seduce the manager of the restaurant, who looks very similar to the lab tech from the night before, and she discovers that the entirety of the Glen is being surveilled and recorded. They discover that the conspiracy runs deeper, as ads that have been playing in the background of several earlier scenes turn out to be for other products that contain this chemical, such as hair products used at the local salon that help straighten your hair because, quote, straighter is greater, end quote. At the hair salon, Slick finds a government-issued key card in a white van that is carrying numerous different products that are all assumingly laced with this happy drug. Then, Fontaine realizes that one of the crazed phrases Frog regularly said seemed to align with the craziness that the three had been experiencing, and so he pays a visit to Frog, who leads him to a nearby church. At the church, the grape juice that is being used as the blood of Christ is also spiked with this mystery drug, and the song that the churchgoers sing as a result of the drug has some rather concerning lyrics conditioning the people of the Glen to believe that their struggles don't matter, including if their, quote, grandson Jamal was gunned down in a drive-by shooting right next to the Dairy Queen, end quote. The music of the church seemed to have a hypnotic and mind-controlling power over the people in the building, which leads Fontaine, Slick, and Yo-Yo to grow suspicious. This introduces us to a new way that the scientists use to control what happens in the Glen: music. After the service, the three discover another elevator in the church's altar, and they discover that the lab runs under the entirety of the Glen, with elevators located in select locations around the city. As they walk through the lab, they see residents of the Glen who are subject to disturbing behavioral experiments. Earlier in the film, we saw several missing person posters around the Glen, specifically one of a girl named Alia Jackson, and at this point we see her again being experimented on with some form of visual stimulation. This leads us to suspect that many, if not all, of the missing people in the Glen are located within the walls of this facility. Next, Fontaine, Yo-Yo, and Slick find the clones. Now, not everyone in the Glen has a clone. Only a few specific people, like the pastor, the person who runs the hair salon, and Fontaine. An explanation of this comes later, but it is evident at this point that the people who are replaced by clones when they die are the people who are important to spreading the drug made by the scientists or to keeping the Glen an undesirable place for outsiders to visit. The pastor distributes the spiked grape juice, and Fontaine unknowingly helps to facilitate the scientists' experiments on the people of the Glen. The three are forced to escape the facility once again after an alarm goes off, and they end up taking an elevator into a strip club, where the DJ brainwashes the club goers with some of the lab's music and has them chase the trio. As they are cornered, a white man named Nixon and a clone of Fontaine called Chester shows up and stops the clubgoers. Nixon reveals that he and other scientists have been conducting experiments to supposedly achieve peace across several cities in the United States and impoverished and predominantly black areas like the Glen, and they did that to avoid suspicion and go unnoticed alongside the undervalued groups in those areas. Nixon threatens the three and tells them that they can die or stop sticking their heads where they don't belong, but Fontaine doesn't like either of those options and goes for option 3 when he tries to kill Nixon. But Nixon uses the trigger word Olympia Black, which leaves Fontaine entirely under Nixon's control and proceeds to put a pistol in his own mouth under Nixon's command. In a very effective scene, a nearby train rattles closer and closer as intensity rises until everything quiets down at Nixon's use of the word relax. They Cloned Tyrone has a lot of scenes that, paired with the right music and sounds, are very effective on the mood of the audience. I specifically love the use of these 3 notes of this low brass instrument that happens every time something strange, dangerous, or slightly sinister appears on screen. The soundtrack and score are the icing on the cake for this film. It's magnificent. The next day, Fontaine is totally wrecked and fearful. He goes to talk with his mother, who, at this point kind of suspiciously, always has an excuse for Fontaine to not enter her room. He decides to knock down the door as he needs the love of his mother, but he's only hurt even more to find that she was only ever a voice on a tape recorder. Though Yo-Yo is not as easily deterred, so she puts together a file and goes undercover to mail it to the Washington Post. But her cover is blown and she is kidnapped by Nixon. This leads Fontaine and Slick to team up with Isaac in a plan to rescue Yo-Yo and free the Glen from the experiments of the scientists. Isaac shoots Fontaine in the shoulder, and Fontaine fakes his death so that he can sneak into the lab when the scientists come to replace him with another clone. Once inside, Fontaine lets Slick, Isaac, and many others into the lab, and chaos erupts as the people being experimented on and the clones are all freed. In all of the chaos, Fontaine is taken out by Chester and taken to the head of the operation in the Glen, himself. The major twist of the film comes into play here, and it is alluded to earlier with Fontaine's clone being A001, the first person to be cloned. The original Fontaine is much older and reveals his motives and totally twisted idea of how to make the world a better place. The brutal murder of Fontaine's little brother Ronnie, committed by a police officer, sparked the original Fontaine to seek ways in which to create peace and unite everyone. On the surface, that sounds like a lovely idea. However, the original Fontaine believes that the only way for there to be peace for everyone is for everyone to be the same. This makes the tubes of clones in the back of original Fontaine's office make a lot more sense. Horrifying sense. Essentially, original Fontaine believes that, quote, assimilation is better than annihilation, end quote. And through cloning, mind control, and mixing specific genetics together, he seeks to completely whitewash the black population of the United States. And the clones featured in the original Fontaine's office show a successful genetic transition of race from black to white, making his freaky peace dream a potential reality. I absolutely love the attention to detail and foreshadowing in this film, and at this moment a lot of those details become very apparent to me. The film opens with a close-up of an ad with a smiling white man and the slogan, quote, keep 'em smiling, reflecting the sort of people original Fontaine wants to create for a peaceful world. And the hair product ads targeting naturally textured hair with the slogan, quote, "straighter is greater," becomes especially significant when the original Fontaine explains that afro hair is the hardest to phase out using genetics. This also could explain the several white characters with afro-textured hair. Additionally, there were a lot of references to Michael Jackson with the use of his name and music within the film. In real life, Michael Jackson had vitiligo, which caused a lot of his skin to lose its pigmentation. But within the film, the references to Michael Jackson could allude to him being an early experiment in this process of turning black people white. There are a lot of subtle nods throughout the film to the huge underlying theme of white supremacy in the process of assimilation, to giving in to a dominant culture or force and losing everything that made you, and connected you with your culture. Again, we saw it with the ads claiming that straight hair is best, with the police brutality that killed Fontaine's little brother, and now with the sci-fi plot to assimilate all black people into white culture by literally turning them white. At this point, Fontaine is done with original Fontaine's crap, and cleverly uses the trigger word Olympia Black to make Chester shoot original Fontaine dead. As the people of the Glen and the clones leave the facility and spill out onto the streets, the secret operation is exposed, and the bizarre sight is broadcasted on televisions across the country. As the film ends, Yo-Yo, Fontaine, and Slick gather and agree to move to Memphis and further expose the operation together. But wait, no, there's more. The film is called They Cloned Tyrone, yet we've yet to see a single Tyrone out there. Until now. For the final few minutes, the film moves locations to Los Angeles, another city that was said to have had this cloning operation running underneath it. Here we meet Fontaine. We watch the person who must be another clone of Fontaine live a lifestyle parallel to that of Fontaine from the Glen. As he is on his way to meet up with his friends, a song plays on the radio of his car with very specific lyrics, including, quote, "You are enslaved to do what I say," end quote, which alludes to the mind control and situation in the Glen also being there in LA. The man and his friends catch the news showing footage of the clones in the Glen. By chance, a Fontaine clone appears on screen, and one of the friends says, quote, "Ain't that you, Tyrone?" end quote, and a satisfying reveal of why the film is named as it is. Before I wrap this video up, I have to talk about the frigging phenomenal soundtrack and score for this film. The soundtrack of this film is by Desmond Murray and Pierre Charles, who did an incredible job creating a soundtrack that flows well together and fits with the general vibe and time of the film, but also works well to channel different emotions, such as suspense, mystique, and fear. The soundtrack is also incredible with 80s and 90s hits that really help to sell the vibe and setting of the film. Additionally, director Joel Taylor revealed in an interview that during the scene in which the crowd that was hypnotized by the music in the club chased after Fontaine, Yo-Yo, and Slick, the crowd continued to receive commands through Morse code in suboral frequencies. That is, frequencies below the threshold of hearing. If you play around with the music at this part of the film, you can make out beats that tell the crowds things such as, quote, "Stop and surround them," end quote, and later, quote, "Carry on," end quote. In the end, They Cloned Tyrone is a super enjoyable film with a phenomenal cast, amazing songs, a thrilling soundtrack, and impeccable style. I thought it was a rather unique film, which was really refreshing. And the film left room for sequels to be made, but I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being a standalone. I absolutely love the attention to detail and the foreshadowing in the film, as it really sells the feeling that everything in the Glen was planned, monitored, and controlled. From the advertisements and products on the shelves to the interactions between people, the mystery in the Glen was equal parts captivating and spooky. Thank you all for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought of the film and its themes in the comments below, and if you have any recommendations of films that I should take a look at next, let me know. As always, be good people, love others, and love yourselves. Peace.